I wrote a graphic novel, and then I tried to go the traditional route. I sent it to more than 100 agents, got more than 50 rejections, and then the rest just ghosted. And then, kind of as I was going through that process, I was like researching how to publish books and kind of what my options were, and realized that there was like a very obvious reason why no agent would want my book.
Elle Griffin set out to query her Gothic novel and made some disappointing discoveries about the publishing industry in the process. That led her to serialize it on Substack. Today, she's going to take us down this unconventional path that definitely has some upsides.
I mean, like Taylor Swift is re-recording all of her old albums right now because the venture capitalist firm owns her masters, and she can't even can't even do what she wants to. Like, they wouldn't even let her perform her old songs at like a, festival she wanted to. Why would you want to lock your art away with somebody who could do anything that they want to it to try to make money, and you have no control over it anymore, and in fact only get 15% of the royalties?
Elle also shares why Anne Lamott's shitty first draft advice does not work for her, what it's been like writing her second serialized novel as she's publishing it, and more in today's episode.
There's nothing to writing. All you do is sit down at a typewriter and bleed.
Welcome to The Bleeders, a podcast and support group about book writing and publishing. I'm writer and podcaster Courtney Kosak, and each week I'll bring you new conversations with authors, agents, and publishers about how to write and sell books.
Hi, I'm Elle Griffin, and I am the author of a Substack newsletter called The Novelist, where I publish serial novels. My first one was Obscurity, a Gothic novel I serialized in 2021, and now I am publishing Oblivion, a utopian novel I'm serializing now.
When did you first identify as a writer?
Professionally, not until like probably 5 years ago. Maybe 6 years ago. But I wrote like a blog for fun always, like since right out of college. It was always like a side thing that I did. So it was, but I never thought of it as a career. It was just like a fun hobby, I guess.
Did you think as a career it was like possible? Do you know what I mean? No.
I did not think it was possible at all.
What's your all-time favorite book?
Les Miserables.
Oh, okay. When did you read it, and what do you love about it?
I read it in like 2017, and I just think it's like one of the most beautiful, most philosophically complex characters. Like Jean Valjean is this kind of character who spends his entire life trying to be good and like doesn't realize until it's like his deathbed that he is good, and even that he like always has been. I don't know. It's just like a very beautiful story.
Had you seen the musical first?
Yes, that was my first Broadway musical when I was like in 7th grade. And that's what spurred my love of Broadway musicals. So it's like kind of crazy because then later it became my favorite book, and also just is what inspired me to write my own novel. So.
Oh, awesome. Okay. What's your dream writing routine?
Just wake up in the morning, have some tea and a croissant, and write. I could probably only write till like noon or something, and then I need to be done.
Is there music? Are you just zoned in?
I don't listen to music unless like my husband's on a conference call or something, and then I will put like my ear pods in.
To drown him out. Yeah. And then what does your real writing routine look like? And I saw you have like a Substack where you kind of go into your ritual, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's basically the same, except I stop at 9 because then I have a day job.
What's one piece of writing that makes you jealous you didn't write it?
Les Miserables.
I need to read that. I love the musical so much.
Yeah, just as beautiful, if not more.
Okay, so let's dive into, I became familiar with your work through Substack, like I think probably a lot of people in your sphere have. And it's such a cool journey. So I just kind of want to dive into, you have 2 novels right now, and one that has already kind of been serialized in full and one in process.
Yep.
Is that correct?
exactly.
So I guess start with the first. Obscurity was your first one?
Yes. Yeah, I wrote a graphic novel and then I tried to go the traditional route. I sent it to more than 100 agents, got more than 50 rejections, and then the rest just ghosted. And then, kind of as I was going through that process, I was like researching how to publish books and kind of what my options were, and realized that there was like a very obvious reason why no agent would want my book. And that's because it was a Gothic novel that probably best comped with 100-year-old books like Les Miserables and The Count of Monte Cristo and A Christmas Carol. And so I was like, well, this probably has a niche audience more than anything. And that's when I started looking at all the research about the creator economy,
Uh-huh.
looking into like Patreon and all these other options, and ultimately landed on Substack. So I published it on Substack one chapter at a time. And kind of while I was doing that, documented my process in real time and kind of how it was working for me. Like when I started on Substack, there were only like 8 other fiction writers on the platform, and most of them were doing short stories. Now there's like a million. So,
When did you first start?
well, my Substack started in February of 2021, and then my novel started in September of 2021. So I like did a ramp up period, try to like grow a subscriber base first.
So was that your first novel that you had attempted to write?
I attempted to write another one when I was in my 20s. I wrote like a young adult fantasy novel, but I was like following bad advice. I had like read some book that said you're supposed to write like a crappy first draft first and then make it perfect in the second draft. But like the first draft was so bad and I hated it so much that I hated it. It was just like not worth trying to resurrect and like rewrite the whole thing. Like even the plot was bad. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try this again and start over. And this time I'm going to write the way like I write journalism, which is just like one perfect paragraph, then another perfect paragraph, then until like by
Yeah.
then I'm done. And so that's what I did with the second novel.
How long did that process take you, like writing it, quote unquote, kind of perfectly? Did you still have to go back and like do another pass? And how long did it take?
It took me 2 years to write it. And then I thought I was just going to be done with it. But then I had my dad read it, and the way that I had written it was chronologically. So originally I had written it like, here's this woman in Paris, and she like joins a convent, and then she comes to New Orleans. But my dad was like, the New Orleans part is like where things get really juicy. I feel like you should like start there. So then I decided to cut the whole Paris part and then insert it like her whole like backstory as like flashbacks. So we start with her arriving in New Orleans and then flash back to her past in Paris from time to time.
Oh, okay. Cool. So, yeah, let's dive into that querying process. You said you went out to 100 people. What was your strategy going in, and what did you learn from it aside from I want to go to Substack?
Well, I think the turning point was when I was trying to research like, okay, how is this even going to work? I like knew nothing about the publishing industry.
Right.
And so I like researched this article that I called No One Will Read Your Book, and just shared like a bunch of stats about the publishing industry. And then I had a follow-up post called Why Writing Books Isn't a Good Idea. And it basically what I learned is that even among traditionally published books, so like say I do get an agent, say I do get a publishing house, like a Penguin publishing house, like top of the top, then I'm still looking at it's 268 books. Only 268 books sell more than 100,000 copies in a year, which is like nothing. Like if you look at the top 10 books in the world and see that they're selling like 100,000 copies, like that's silly compared to like the top 10 movies, which are saying like seeing millions and millions. So I was just like, this is kind of like a dying art. And then 96% of books sell less than 1,000 copies. So I was like, even if I traditionally publish and they get 75% of my royalties, I'm still going to sell 1,000 copies and make zero money. It just seems silly. I would be better off just trying to like build a following for my own work and like trying to monetize it directly. And so when I started my newsletter, that was my intent, was to grow like a newsletter following. And then however I published my book, whether it was on Amazon or whatever, at least I would have an audience for it that I could sell it to. But then in the process of like creating that and started to build some kind of hype on Substack, then I was like, okay, I'll just publish it here. And this is in fact how a lot of people used to publish books, including my favorite authors. So
through magazines, right?
yeah, through magazines and newspapers. So, The Count of Monte Cristo was a serial Alexander Dumas published in a local newspaper, and he did it in like 18 installments. And I started like looking into his story and realizing that he made $64,000, like in today's dollars, per installment.
What?
Yeah. So he's like, because it's over time, like if you can imagine how much money a television show generates versus a movie, because it's continually coming out.
Right.
This is a better model. I think I'd rather have subscribers than like a one-time sale for $10. So,
you know what is so interesting about your story is that most people go through the querying process, and their big takeaway, I think, if they don't get anywhere, is like, I suck. Or like, you know what I mean? Or, they take the rejection personally. And I love that your take on it was just like, oh no, let me think about this logically. Actually, the problem is with them. And you really like took it into your own hands and made it work. So, okay, then doing it on Substack, what was the response and what did you learn from that part?
it was kind of interesting because the original way that I planned it was my newsletter was free and my novel chapters were paid subscription, which is a very stupid way to do that. Because I had like 250 paid subscribers or something. So that was like the maximum amount of people that could read my book. And then I had way more than that newsletter subscribers. And what they were really valuing was like the newsletter portion of like my behind the scenes journey.
Mm-hmm.
And also I wrote the book to be traditionally published. So it's very like slow and creeping and just like gently haunting the whole way through. So it's not really like great for a serial format. So I definitely changed that around this year when I debuted my second novel, Oblivion, and all of my chapters are super short. They're, less than 500 words. There's a hook at the end of every single one to keep you interested. And then they're free. So any of my subscribers, all my subscribers will get them. And then the thing that I charge for now is like, I'll have some author commentary at the bottom of a chapter if they want to learn like my influences for it. And they have to pay if you want to comment on them as well. So like my paid subscribers will get in and like comment on it and be like, oh, I'm really interested in this character. I can't wait to see where that goes. So it's like now I feel like designing the writing for the platform is much better and it's much more engaging and people are part of the process and I'm writing it live. So I could change how my next chapter turns out on the fly. So it's much more like of a collaborative thing this time around.
Oh, you're writing it live.
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can be super like responsive and kind of learn as you go too. That is so interesting. It is very true. Like people will pay for craft more than they will pay for entertainment. And also part of it's just like how we've been conditioned because you would think, yes, I'm going to put my book behind the paywall, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, even if you think about it, that's just not how art works right now. Like you'll pay $10 to read like the Da Vinci Code. But if you're a writer, you might pay $180 to watch Dan Brown do a master class on how he wrote the Da Vinci Code and like how he got it published. So that's kind of the take that I'm employing with my newsletter is like all my art is free for you to be a patron of, but the like behind the scenes and like how it's made and how it's working is like paid now.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I have another newsletter. I have one for Bleeders, this podcast, but I have a newsletter for podcasters and it's not monetized yet, but I'm approaching the 1-year anniversary and will soon. And I'm like, oh, this is actually a better business than the podcast that I make. That's hilarious.
Podcast about podcasting? Absolutely. Because everyone's like, how do I do this? I want to do something you did.
Hey, so this is a not so subtle plug for my other newsletter. It's called Podcast Bestie, and it's full of podcasting tips and tricks for aspiring and indie podcasters. So if you have a podcast or you're thinking about starting one, check out the link in this episode description and join the squad. Okay, so now you have a second novel in progress. It's a utopian novel. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Oblivion is a utopian novel, and I'm writing, there's two parts to it. I'm like doing all of the research for it in nonfiction form. So I'm writing these essays, imagining a more beautiful future, and then I'm like using that research to write my fiction chapters. And it's about every other week. So one Monday, I might have an article that's called "We Won't Need Doctors in the Future," and here's all my research on that. And then the next week, it's chapter 1. And then, it kind of goes from there. So it's been really fun because on the Substack app, there's this new section called Substack Chat, and you can have like daily conversations with newsletter subscribers. And we've just been like geeking out in there, sharing all this like utopian content and like what books everybody's reading. And would this kind of government work, or would this kind of city be the most beautiful? And it's just been kind of fun to like do all the brainstorming collaboratively. And then what comes from that is the art. So it's been fun.
Oh my God, that's amazing. And like the perfect antidote to the constant dystopia that we live in. Yes.
We need more utopian novels so we can imagine something better. It's horrible that we only have the negative way things could go.
Totally. What have you learned about yourself or your writing process while working on both of these projects?
Well, it's interesting because it's so different from, I'm like a journalist by profession, and that is all about generating page views, because that's where advertisers advertise. And like journalism is very much fact-based. Like all of these things have to be facts, and they have to be back-upable. And then there's writing a blog where you don't have to have any facts or anything. And it's like kind of about your life. And you can just write whatever you want, and you can not capitalize your eyes if you want. And it just, there's no rules. So when I first created my Substack, I was like, okay, I want this to be no rules. Like this is where I can have fun and be creative. And that has been really fun because I've done so many weird things with my Substack. And I just think I think it's really fun to explore and just try different things. And like after this book, like the first book was really fun. I was like, oh, I'm serializing a Gothic novel in the vein of all the Gothic novelists. And then this time it's like, oh, I'm writing a utopian novel and imagining a more beautiful future. And then like after this, I kind of want to just do I want to get into fan fiction and like write a fan fiction, which would be really fun, which I could do using my current model and keep it free and monetize the other part of my newsletter. So I think there's just so many amazing things you could do with it, which I think is just fun to explore.
Yeah. Oh, I saw an article I read an article about fanfic and copyrights.
Oh yeah.
So were you like brainstorming when you wrote that?
Yeah, totally. Because I think right now fan fiction is super niche, and you have to be like into like AO3 and fanfiction.net and like these kind of obscure sites. And there are a lot of people that use those, but I think it'd be really fun to do in a Substack format because it would just get more exposure, and I think be really interesting to people that already follow those works. So I think it'd be fun. And yeah, you have to be able to do it in a legal way because otherwise you could get totally screwed over. But there are ways to do it legally.
As a Substacker, and for any Substackers listening, like, do you have one kind of piece of advice that you would dispense?
Yeah. When I was first starting out, I interviewed a lot of authors who were already serializing fiction online. And those included people who were doing it on Patreon, or people who were doing it on Wattpad, or doing it on Royal Road. And the interesting thing is everybody had the same response for how they grew their audience. And it was like they were just so obsessed with that platform, and they were already reading there and interacting there and engaging with other people's work there. But by the time they were already starting their own work on the platform, they were like a very enmeshed community member.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that works with Substack just as it does on any other platform. Like you see a lot of people saying, oh, my Substack's going nowhere, my Substack's going nowhere. And I'm like, do you read on Substack? Are you commenting on other Substacks? Are you like an active participant on the newsletters you follow? Because that's how you find people and that's how you find your people. And now a lot of the subscribers that subscribe to my newsletter, I'm also subscribed to their newsletter. And we're like, we know each other. We've been commenting on each other's stuff for a year now. You have to kind of develop that core community wherever you are.
That's really good advice. You do not have to answer this if you don't want to, but just like, how is it going? Are you able to kind of replace some of your income?
Well, no, I earned $19,000 from my first year on the platform. A little bit more than that. I'd have to pull up the number.
That's a good chunk though.
Yeah. So pretty good for year one on the platform. And that, $19,000 from only like 280 people is kind of insane. So that the idea that you have a small number of people patronizing is not the right word. Patroning? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is cool. And I feel like that I do want to see if I can take that further. But my job is a full-time job. So it's not like I could just like replace half of it and do my job halfway. So I kind of can't really do that until I'm like making a full-time living from Substack, which probably would take a couple more years.
Well, hoping you get there soon. Yeah, it's such a cool platform. I love it.
Oh, it's so fun.
So looking forward, you are going to write this fanfic. Do you have any bucket list writing goals?
Yeah, that's probably the next one. I don't really have any outside of that. Recently somebody said something to me that made me think that my goals weren't big enough. I wasn't like dreaming big enough. So I was like, okay, I need to like come up with bigger goals. So I decided to do this exercise where I would like write my own Wikipedia page. And so I've been like writing that right now and trying to see like what would I want it to say about me. And one thing I was thinking is like, oh, well, if I'm like the sky's the limit, then yeah, like, okay, Oblivion becomes a series on HBO and there's maybe I'm part of writing the script and maybe I can even have a bit part in it. Like, why not? And
Hell yeah.
Yeah. And so I've kind of thought about that, things like that. That would be really fun. I'm collabing with this guy, Matt, who has a Substack, Fog Chaser. He's been writing music to go with my novel chapters. And they sound like the book. They're just so beautiful and meditative and calming and gorgeous. And so we've been like talking about maybe making an album, which would be kind of fun. And so there's a lot of other ways that I want to use my writing skills that I think would be fun, but it's kind of like first things first, and then we'll see where we can go.
Yeah. Okay, cool. What is one piece of writing advice you wish you could give your former self?
It's hard because my former self, there wasn't really great opportunities for writers. I feel like Substack only really came about in the last couple of years. And before that, it was like a WordPress blog, which I had, Medium, which I had.
Great. No notes.
Yeah. So I feel like if you're starting now, just like build a platform for yourself. But yeah, former self, there weren't great options out there for being a writer.
Fair enough. One tip for writers trying to get a book published.
Don't.
Are you just done with it's not on your bucket list? Do you have any traditional publishing goals at this point?
I mean, like Taylor Swift is re-recording all of her old albums right now because the venture capitalist firm owns her masters and she can't even can't even do what she wants to. Like they wouldn't even let her perform her old songs at like a festival she wanted to. Why would you want to lock your art away with somebody who could do anything that they want to it to try to make money and you have no control over it anymore, and in fact only get 15% of the royalties? And that's just wild. And especially if it used to make sense because they were providing a ton of marketing and were getting you in front of an audience you didn't have access to. But now you have access to make that happen for yourself, and you don't need that. And they're not going to provide you any marketing. And in fact, they're only trying to book authors who already have a big following. So it seems silly to just like sign away the rights to your book and also only get 15% of the returns for it when you could just as easily make your own platform.
Preach. Yes.
Yeah.
What is your all-time favorite piece of your own writing?
Probably obscurity, but I did write some fun articles. Like, I always loved this article I wrote that was called "I'm Secretly Loving the Pandemic." I think it was actually called "Secretly Loving the End of the World," which I thought was really fun. And I also wrote a nonfiction piece called "Why I No Longer Read the New York Times," which was, I think, I really loved that piece. But fiction, definitely obscurity.
Okay, so I guess one more question for you. You interview other writers, sometimes on your Substack. What is one or two of your favorite takeaways that you've gotten from interviewing other writers?
I would say that most authors are undervaluing their work, not charging enough, not offering higher tiers, not asking for money. They just, like, a lot of people think that you can just kind of coast and just like grow a following and that will automatically mean you'll make a living doing it, but you actually have to like have a business strategy, and like you can't just wait for people to subscribe. Like none of them, everyone who's doing it on Patreon, everyone who's doing it on Wattpad, like they're all like, there are some lucky breaks you can get in terms of algorithms recommending your books, at least on Wattpad and things like that, but you still have to, market yourself.
Oh my God, this has been amazing. I feel like I just got a masterclass in business strategy for writers. So how can listeners find your work, find your Substack, and connect with you online?
Yeah, so my Substack is just ellegriffin.substack.com, and that's just ELLEGRIFFIN.substack.com.
Are you on Twitter?
No.
Oh, I thought you were.
I started a Twitter when I started my Substack, but I really hated it, so I deleted it.
Okay, well, good for you. So take it from Elle. You can successfully build platform without being on Twitter. If you don't like it, don't do it. Thank you so much to Elle for sharing your inspiring Substack journey. That is it for this edition of The Bleeders. But if you're eager for more, make sure you check out the last episode with Write or Die Tribe founder Kaylee Brennan Della Russo on her novel in progress. This is truly the perfect NaNoWriMo listen. Here is a little preview.
One of the things I'm trying to be better about is holding it more loosely. Like, it's okay for me, even in this stage, to be playing around with scenes that I might never use, or, just jotting down notes about a character's backstory that I'll never put in the draft. Like, not being so precious about my writing time needs to generate words that are going to be in this draft,
Oh, I love the concept of holding it loosely. I'm obsessed. I'm so glad Kaylee turned me on to that. And thank you for joining me for this episode of The Bleeders. Writing is so much better with friends. I'm your host, Courtney Kosak, and hey, let's connect on social media. I am at Courtney Kosak, Kosak, on Twitter and Instagram. And make sure you're signed up for the Bleeders Companion Substack. The link is in the episode description. And join me again in 2 weeks for a brand new episode. In the meantime, happy bleeding!